All right, so this is a response. This is a video request for my friend Jeffrey McMahon, who wants me to. How did he put it? Essentially, he wants me to explain the difference, like to sell him on Tier 4 watches, and what is the difference between a Tier 3 watch and a Tier 4 watch. Now, I just want to, most of you who are watching this have heard me talk about the tier system. It's not gospel. It's just I think it's just a useful tool to be able to differentiate different levels of watches in terms of price and what those prices lead to. Like what is it, you can almost group watches, in these different price ranges. And that's what the tier system is. And each tier has sort of different qualities to them. Now, it's not absolute. I would say it's like the 80-20 rule. It's like 80% it's cohesive to a tier, but 20% of the time is an exception. And there's also it's hard to, it's artificial to have a strict cutoff point for prices. So I'm thinking of ways to sort of make the tier system better. So I will eventually do another video, but I might adjust the price ranges. But for now, what I mean by a Tier 1 watch is basically a cheap, usually fashion watch, the type of thing that you'll buy in the mall, or even a really cheap watch that you'll buy at Target. Tier 1 watches cost under $100. Think of brands like Fossil, Swatch. Invicta makes a lot of Tier 1 watches. Pulsar is sort of like owned by Seiko. It's like their Tier 1 brand. Things like that, really inexpensive. Timex. A lot of Casios are Tier 1. And Tier 2 is like where you get to the beginning of collecting. It's like the affordable collectors. Now, we're not snobs here, so we're not going to say that, like a real snob would say Tier 4 is where collecting begins. Or a real snob, I should say, not a real collector. I don't know which one I said. But Tier 2 are the $100 to $400 to $500 range. You start getting, brands like Seiko and Citizen, Tissot. Invicta does a lot of Tier 2 brands, or Tier 2 watches. And they're generally affordable, they're in that affordable range. There's a huge diversity of watches. A lot of people stay in that range. And then Tier 3 is what could be called entry-level luxury, or basic, very basic, pseudo-luxury perhaps. There's different ways to put it. Some people call this mid-tier. It's mid-tier because it's between affordable, non-luxury watches and luxury watches. And I see, from my perspective, mid-tier, Tier 3 is roughly starting around $500, going up to about $2,000. But it depends. I would say it could even creep up to more like $3,000, depending upon the watch you were talking about. And then Tier 4 it's like the first level of quote-unquote true luxury. Tier 4 watches tend to cost between about $2,000 and about $5,000. And this is where you start seeing, Tier 3 brands are like Hamilton, Oris. Longines makes a lot of Tier 3 watches. A lot of the micro brands, micro divers are Tier 3. And Tier 4 are the less expensive true luxury brands. I would say a lot of Tag Heuer are in Tier 4. They're Tier 3 to 4. Omega makes a lot of Tier 4 watches. Tudor is the Rolex Tier 4 brand. So Rolex is your quintessential Tier 5 brand, which is Rolex's, Tier 5 is like your quote-unquote true luxury range. And these watches, they cost between around $5,000 US dollars to about $15,000, $12,000 to $15,000. And there's Rolex, Breitling makes a lot of Tier 5, Omega makes some Tier 5. Zenith is very much a Tier 5 brand. I would put IWC in there. Panerai. JLC makes some Tier 5, although they're kind of Tier 5 to 6. And then Tier 6 are your high-end luxury, and they range from around $15,000 to about $100,000. and these are higher end Rolexes. All the the Holy Trinity, the Patek or Patek, as I think most people call it, Vacheron Constantin, Audemars Piguet, Blancpain, Breguet, Lenga and Zone, etc. Your higher end pieces. And then tier 7, now here's Bodhi, who's a tier 8 cat. Tier 7 is the what I would call ultra luxury. These are the watches that this is, by the way, I just have to introduce you to Bodhi. He is I have never loved a cat like I love this. I'm a real cat person, but I am so attached to this cat. It scares me, actually, because we live in a very natural environment here, and there's Fisher cats, which are like vicious. They're kind of like a cross between a weasel and a wolverine. There's coyotes, there's raccoons. I think there's even there's been bobcats, and there's been I'll say, I'm trying to think what else. Somebody's, there's bears. Not that a bear is going to get a cat. Somebody's even seen a mountain lion around here. So, by the way, I think one of my videos is playing in the background too. Sorry for the, Jeff, I apologize for the, I actually shouldn't have to apologize to you, Jeff, for the unprofessional interruptions. For you, it's your kid. For me, it's Bodhi. Anyways, he's being very lovey right now, and he's a very aware cat, and he was very aptly named, for those of you who know what Bodhi means. He's just a really special guy, and I love all cats, but he's something else. Oh, as you can see, all right. I might need to pause here. Anyways, he's probably more entertaining than me. All right, buddy. I don't know what to do about this. Come on. All right. See, look, he even knows. He knows when he's outworn his welcome. All right, so back to the tiers. Tier 7, ultra luxury, $100,000 and above. These, in a way, it's sort of a... I'm sure that there are sort of micro tiers within tier 7, but to me, it's all the same as far as, like... I know there's watches that are, like Richard Mille in the $100,000 range, $100,000 to $200,000. And then there are the really super ultra high-end pieces that are over $1 million, and I'm sure there's a difference. There's got to be a difference between those, but for most of us, it's all tier 7. It's all so far on the horizon that we can categorize it as one thing. So most of us are going to stay tier 5 and below, or tier 6 and below, right? And many people, it's all relative. Like, what is a truly luxurious, great piece is all relative to what you're used to. And I've certainly found, starting with, I worked my way up the tiers. I worked my way, this was my watch, which I'll show you more in a minute. This little Pulsar, for years, because I wasn't a watch guy. I just liked the way it looked. I liked the chronograph. I never even used the chronograph function. But I wore this for years, and it served me. It was a solid, wristwatch. And this is the thing we have to remember about watches, that you don't need anything above a tier 1 watch. There are probably, for specific activities, there are tier 2 watches, like, a lot of G-Shocks range between tier 1 to 2. I think they're mainly tier 2. And there are other higher functions that you might only find in tier 2. But if we're talking about just functionality, you don't need anything more than a tier 1 or a tier 2 watch. Tier 1 watches tell time just as good, if not better, than tier 7 watches, because quartz movements are battery powered and more accurate. And I think in general less goes wrong with a quartz movement. Plus, this thing cost me $55. So if it breaks, you don't get it serviced. You don't get it fixed necessarily unless you're really attached to it. You just buy a new one, right? Whereas if you're, $40,000 Patek Nautilus, you want to get that serviced, right? So everything above tier 2 really is luxury, right? Because it's meaning luxury. It's not necessary. It's beyond the function. And you could say, therefore, not to harp on my buddy Stuart Lomas, but there's an artistic quality because it's not necessary for just functionality. It's beyond necessity, or it's the joy of it is itself, right? The beauty of the watch itself. So all of that is a preamble. Let me talk a little bit about the first 4 to 5 tiers as far as what the differences are. And for that, I'm actually going to show you some watches because I have watches from tiers 1 to 4. So I can actually kind of point some things out that I see as being differences. And then I'll talk about what the differences are between 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, a little bit more. All right, one moment. The price ranges. But for now, what I mean by a tier 1 watch is basically a cheap, usually fashion watch, the type of thing that you'll buy in the mall, or even a really cheap watch that you'll buy at Target. You know, tier 1 watches cost under $100. Think of brands like between a tier 3 watch and a tier 4 watch. Now, I just want to, most of you who are watching this have heard me talk about the tier system. It's not gospel. It's just I think it's just a useful tool to be able to differentiate different levels of watches in terms of price. Percent of the time is an exception. And there's also it's hard to, it's artificial to have a strict cutoff point for prices. So I'm thinking of ways to sort of make the tier system better. So I will eventually do another video, but I might adjust the... All right, so this is a response. This is a video request for my friend Jeffrey McMahon, who wants me to, how did he put it? Essentially he wants me to explain the difference, like to sell him on tier 4 watches, and what is the difference and what those prices lead to. Like what is it? You can almost group watches, in these different price ranges, and that's what the tier system is. And each tier has sort of different qualities to them. Now it's not absolute. I would say it's like the 80-20 rule. It's like 80% it's cohesive to a tier, but 20%